Probably the most foundational element of Christianity is the characteristic of love. All of Christianity hangs on the death and resurrection of Jesus, which only happened because of God's love for us. God's greatest commandments for anyone who believes in him is that they love him and love other people. The Bible itself is often called God's love letter to us. Because of these things, it makes a lot of sense when we read in 1 John chapter 4 that God is love. This phrase, God is love, is often heard in Christian circles, and rightly so. However, it's important to remember that this phrase doesn't work both forwards and backwards. Yes, God is love, but it's important for people to remember that love is not God. This way of thinking that love is God is found not only among some believers, but also among people who are anti-Christian. This is why some of the oldest arguments made against Christianity include things like, how can a loving God send people to hell? Or, if God really loved me, then he would love me for who I am instead of telling me to act a certain way. Some Christians have fallen into this kind of thinking, and have abandoned many biblical principles or the Christian faith altogether because it's just not very loving and inclusive. You see, what happens is that people falsely believe that because God is love, that love is their God. If anything is not loving, then it must not be a part of God. We have to understand that just because God is love doesn't mean that God is only love and nothing else. There is so much more to God than just the characteristic of love. God is all pure, which means that there cannot be anything impure that can be a part of him. God is just. He cannot simply ignore the cost of sin. God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. God is timeless. There are so many more aspects of God that need to be considered in order for us to understand who he is. When we reduce God to the single characteristic of love, then we are actually setting up an idol, a false God in our life. We make love our God and twist our interpretations of God to fit that false mold in our mind. God is so much more than just love. But we stop serving the one true God in order to serve the characteristic of love. And when we do this, we do exactly what the Pharisees did when they reduced God down to the characteristic of righteousness. God is also righteous, but the Pharisees made that aspect of righteousness their God, without including everything else that God is. They threw out the love of God. They threw out the mercy of God. Their whole religion became about making themselves righteous and holding others to that standard of righteousness. You see, any time you reduce God to a single characteristic and serve that characteristic only, you've set up a false God in your life. God has done many things that are not very loving in our eyes. He told Israel's king to kill Amalekite children. He struck a couple dead just for lying about how much money they made. And even Jesus compared a Canaanite woman to a dog and attacked people with a whip. Now, did these actions mean that God was no longer loving? Absolutely not. It was simply that his love operated in the context of his righteousness and truth. This is why it's so important for us to not reduce God down to just the characteristic of love. Yes, God is love, but love is not our God. If you're interested in talking to me more about this subject, or if you have any questions about why God did something that didn't seem very loving, I encourage you to contact me either through this program's Facebook page or by emailing me at sermoninthepocket@gmail.com. For those of you who are interested in helping me cover the cost of this program, the best way to do that is by pledging a monthly support on my Patreon page. And I encourage all of you to share this program with family and friends to help spread the message. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen, and I pray that you have a wonderful day.